What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about a film I got to check out a little bit early coming from Saban Films, and that film is called Cult Killer. Directed by John Keeyes and written by Charles Burnley, this film stars people like Antonio Banderas, Alice Eve, Shelley Hennig, Matthew Tompkins, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, let's hear a word from today's sponsor. Whether you're trying to get yourself in the right headspace for the day, maybe you got a lot of stress going on in your day-to-day life, or you're like me and you do not have a good sleep schedule, you're going to want to try out the sponsor of today's video, and that is Hemp Honey. They use all natural ingredients, no GMOs, no artificial flavors, infused with their hemp extract to give you a various amount of products that can give you different forms of alleviation for your specific needs. Me personally, as I mentioned, I don't sleep all that well, so I've been trying their Hemp Honey sticks, the sleep version, which these are great. You can literally ingest them right out of the stick itself. You can put it into your coffee, into your tea, whatever the case may be. And I'd like it because it doesn't make me ever feel overly drowsy or anything like that. But instead, once I've actually fallen asleep, I'm having far deeper sleep, waking up feeling far more rested. And the kind folks over at Hemp Honey are giving you guys the chance to get 10% off of your order over on their website by following the link in my description box down below and putting promo code Perez10 at checkout. Again, a big thanks to Hemp Honey for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. And as I typically like to do anytime I get to check out a movie a little bit early, I'd like to say a big thanks to those kind folks that sent me this movie a little bit early, and that is the kind folks over at Saban Films. Whether I enjoy one of their films or not, I'm always grateful to be able to check out one of their movies early and talk to you guys about it. And today we're talking about Cult Killer, which instantly grabbed my attention when I saw the poster and saw Antonio Banderas. Now, while I have not been a huge fan of some of the films that he's done in recent years that are not big theatrical releases, and in some of those films I feel like he's underutilized, I am a fan of Antonio Banderas across the board. So seeing him on the poster instantly at least gave me some intrigue to check this movie out. And this film will be coming out on January 19th, so definitely if this is something you're intrigued by, I guess put it on your calendar. But I gotta start this off immediately by saying that unfortunately I was not a fan of Cult Killer. And of course, since the movie hasn't come out yet, I'm not gonna touch on spoilers, but as I typically like to do anytime I get to check out one of these movies a little bit early, most notably movies that are a little bit lesser known, something that's going to digital or having a limited theatrical run that isn't as big as a big Hollywood release, I try to go in without having seen a trailer, without reading a synopsis, and in the case of this one, it was just like that. I only saw the poster, I saw who was in it, at least the two lead stars, and I just went into it completely and utterly blind. Now, after having checked out the film, I can be completely honest in starting this off by saying I was not a fan of Cult Killer. But let's talk about what this movie is all about, and then we'll talk about why I didn't love this film. The movie opens up and we're introduced to Antonio Banderas as this private investigator. He's got a gun on him. He gets himself into some tight situations from time to time. And at the very beginning of this film, he's in a bar doing what he does, and he comes across a woman played by Alice Eve who has found herself in a bit of a pickle with some men that are trying to take advantage of her. He ends up coming to her rescue and deduces in this situation that she is an alcoholic and that she needs a new path in life. And so he decides to actually offer her the opportunity to come under his wing as a private investigator. And then the movie jumps 5 years into the future. She's now been in this lifestyle, learning to defend herself as well as learning to be a private investigator under Antonio Banderas. But literally within the first 5 to 8 minutes of this movie, Antonio Banderas is killed. He's stabbed to death by a woman that you can't see who she is immediately, but you learn very quickly into the movie is a woman who is out there trying to kill this cult that had took advantage of her back in the day. So now she has come back all these years later trying to take out the individual cult leaders, and unfortunately Antonio Banderas just found himself at the wrong place at the wrong time. This of course breaks the heart of the young woman that he actually was able to kind of take under his wing, played by Alice Eve, and instantly I was like, okay, misleading marketing. They throw Antonio Banderas right on the cover of the poster, obviously trying to use his namesake as the biggest way to try to brand this movie. And while he is in the film spiritually through flashbacks for our main character, the main character of the film is Alice Eve. It's not Antonio Banderas. So if you are like me and you saw the poster and you're going into this movie expecting to have an Antonio Banderas action thriller of some sort, it's not him. He's in the film more on a spiritual level, but he's really not a big presence in terms of the actual present day story that's being told. And so now Alice Eve's character must try to find who it was that killed her close friend who trained her to be a private investigator. But not long into the film, we do learn that this young woman who killed him, unfortunately by accident, actually is somebody who went through a lot of trauma, a very similar trauma that Alice Eve's character also went through. So now Alice Eve's character has found herself in a bit of a tight bind where she has this individual who's a serial killer who killed her friend, but is going after this cult that has been inflicting trauma on this serial killer as well as on many other women. And so Alice Eve has this part of her that feels connected to this serial killer, even though she did murder her friend, but she also recognizes that there's this bigger threat in this cult that's being killed that is abusing people. And that's pretty much the general premise of this film. Throughout the course of the film, Alice Eve has to try to decide what she wants to do, who she wants to side with. She finds herself in a bit of an unconventional kind of connection with this individual who killed Antonio Banderas, her friend. And what you have is a pretty generic, straightforward, you've seen it before, but this is done pretty poorly version of an action thriller. This movie for me was a bit of a chore to get through. It was wildly boring. I mean, insanely boring. I was really just struggling to have any interest in this movie as it was playing out. And again, I went into it expecting an Antonio Banderas film. I was disappointed by that, but I've seen some of these other actors that are in this film in various other things, with Alice Eve probably being the most notable one. And so I don't want to necessarily throw shade specifically at the actors, but it just feels like everybody kind of went into this just to get a paycheck. It feels like everybody's phoning it in. And on one hand, I feel like it really comes down more to the directing and the writing. I feel like the cast was trying. There are times where some of the villain characters that are part of the cult are definitely hamming up their performances and trying to, lean into what this whole premise is. There are times where it feels like our cast is trying to give good performances in this film. And I do think that it just comes down to the script and the screenplay that ultimately I think really failed them. They were trying their best to give the best performance they can for a pretty weak and kind of generic screenplay, a script that oftentimes made me laugh because of the dialogue. There are moments where there's dialogue between characters that just makes you go like, why did they leave that in? Like, why did you have the characters speak to each other in that manner? Why even have that character say that? And oftentimes it led to some of these performances coming off a bit stilted, a bit awkward. And again, I've seen some of these actors, most notably Alice Eve and Antonio Banderas, in other films, and some of the other actors I've seen in some TV shows here and there. So I know that they're capable actors, and that's why I can't help but think it just really came down to the script and the screenplay and the direction they were given. I don't really think that they were set up for success when it comes down to their characters, their character motivations. And then as just an overall, as far as just an overall screenplay and overall script, the movie itself doesn't do enough to really flesh out characters and moments. Certain things just come off very stilted and rushed and very awkward a lot of times. And there are times where things just feel wildly convenient, or sometimes it feels like what's happening doesn't really match what the characters are saying. And ultimately, you just have a movie that just came across incredibly bland. Everything about it, even the cinematography, in the modern day where you have cameras that can just make something look great, the cinematography felt incredibly stilted. It felt like a straight-to-video movie from the early 2000s or the late 90s, and I mean that in the worst way, unfortunately. While I think the film has some interesting things to say about how trauma and abuse kind of affects different people, and how a lot of times, even with massive differences, people who have undergone similar traumas can find connection with one another, I think that the film ultimately just never created a well-paced enough, exciting enough story to ever really grab on to me. There was nothing about this film that ever really pulled me in. There was nothing about the characters that ever made me care. And again, I think a lot of it was really down to the screenplay and the script. I'm really struggling to even find things to talk about. This month, January, has been a mixed bag. I can't wait till we start getting better movies this year that ultimately inspire me to be more passionate talking about them, or that I can come to you guys talking about various thematic elements and break down a bunch of different elements of a film. But when I was watching Cult Killer, all I can think was, this film is so boring. It is so generic on every level. There's nothing here that audiences have not seen yet. There's nothing here that's going to impress any fans of any of the actors that are on screen here. There's nothing here that's going to inspire somebody to want to, tell their friends to check this movie out. I think that's one of my favorite things about movies, is checking out a movie, especially some obscure ones that I sometimes get to check out doing this YouTube channel, and being like, hey guys, you probably haven't heard of this film, but check this one out. Like, this is not one that went to theaters. It's like kind of like a lower tier movie in terms of like being marketed heavily. Check it out. And there's been a number of films in the last few years that I have praised, some small obscure films that I got to check out that ultimately later on went on to get onto streaming services or something like that, but ones that you had to like rent or purchase right out of the gate, that I would tell my audience, like, you guys need to check this movie out. Like, there are some good ones. In the case of Cult Killer, it's just one of those movies that I'm like, I feel bad for anybody who spends, you know, a few bucks to rent this movie because they're like, oh, Antonio Banderas, I really like him, or Alice Eve, or any of the other actors, you know, that they get pulled in by that poster, and then you ultimately have a movie that just is beyond forgettable. Beyond forgettable. My fiance was watching it with me and she was so bored. She's like, this movie is boring me to death. And it's literally the words that she gave me. And she was sitting here on the living room couch watching with me, and she just got up and left. She just like, I just have lost all interest. And mind you, she'll sit here and watch movies with me that are terrible all the time. But we both can at least appreciate a movie that's somewhat entertaining and still bad. But this movie was just bad and boring and poorly written and just bland. And I don't want to keep saying the same things over and over again, but I'm just like struggling to find words. So when it comes down to this movie, whether you're coming to this review before the movies come out, or you saw the movie and that's what brought you here and you just had to hear somebody talk about it, let me know what you guys thought about it. If you disagree with me and you thought this movie was a great time, totally cool, totally appreciate the various opinions. Let me know what worked about this movie for you. If you didn't like this movie, let me know where you agree with me on this, and maybe some issues that you personally had that I didn't mention here. Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.